Beth Norcross and Laurel Kearns. You are the co-founders of Seminary Initiative. Will you tell the story of how you met and began to nurture GSI into creation?
Sure. Well, I'll get us started and Laurel will chime in. Laurel Kearns and David Rhodes were both working independently at trying to green seminaries. I want to give that a lot of credit. And also the TMEC, Theological Education to Meet
the Environmental
Challenge was had done a lot of work as a foundation. But there wasn't too much going on in an organized way. I had just completed work at a pretty progressive seminary and really was disappointed to have heard nothing or very little about our environmental challenges. So I was stewing on this and was at a meeting after Katrina and in the spring of 2006, and somebody said, you know, you really need to go talk to David Rhodes. So in Chicago at Lutheran School of Theology, Chicago. And I just emailed him and said, I'm coming to Chicago. I'm coming to see you. And he said, well, okay, I don't know who you are, but come on along. And so we met and we had a fabulous meeting. He was thrilled to have somebody else in the throes of this. And we ultimately then met up with Laurel and had a meeting at the AAR-SBL meeting that happened to be in Washington that year. And an idea was born, it was formed. And then I'll let Laurel take it from there. There was an opportunity that arose to really put this thing on the map with the next AAR-SBL meeting in San Diego the next year. So at that point we were a threesome and we were ready to lift this really important work of infusing an ecological ethic into theological education off the ground. So then what happened, Laurel?
Well, fortunately, at that point, I was serving on the American Academy of Religion's Sustainability Committee. And so this seemed very appropriate, and we went to the Theological Education Committee and launched in 2007. And that was a pretty star-studded. We thought, let's get the elders, sort of the folks who have paved the path before us, but their institutions weren't replacing them with someone who also paid attention to ecology when they retired. So to a room of probably around 300 people at AAR-SBL, we had Sally McFaig, Rosemary Radford-Ruther, Larry Rasmussen, Cal DeWitt, who played a really important role in developing evangelical environmentalism. We had David Rhodes, we had Norman Hobble, and
that's six.
That's six. And so we asked each of them to address the question of why this was important in theological education. They had all, many of them had been at seminaries. They were had trained the generation that I was a part of. In fact, trained the generation before me in some ways. And so that launched it, and we had an incredible, incredible response.
I just wanted to pause for a moment there because it was an extraordinary event. We had planned for about 100, and we were in a good sized room, and people kept coming and coming and coming. And what really shook me was how many young scholars and young students there were in the room. They were yearning for theological education to pay attention to this. They knew it was important, and they came to see these elders, the saints of our field, all gathered in one place, and it was really electrifying, and it was just a perfect, wonderful launch to this really, really essential work in the world. And they put out a clarion call. There was no doubt about it. I'll remember Larry Rasmussen in particular. Theological education must pay attention to this. It is the most significant issue that theology is going to face in the next 20 to 30 years, and we will be left behind and be irrelevant if theological education doesn't pay attention to it.
And we were very fortunate. I had been hired at Drew in the early 90s to work on, because of working on this topic, and I had two senior colleagues who already really brought this in, Catherine Keller and Heather Elkins. And so Drew was willing to sort of, at first the Green Seminary Initiative was held at Lutheran Theological School of Chicago, and David Rhodes had developed a Web of Creation website that had come out of TMAC, and a brochure and sort of how to green your institution. And so that really got us started. And then we worked on a more up-to-date website that...
well, that was the thing, you know, there was a lot of existing information sort of scattered around, but people didn't know about it, and people weren't paying attention to it. And so we were beginning to think about what our next steps were. Certainly the first step was to get the website updated and up and running in a way that people could use. And so we put probably 50 different syllabi up there and started to generate some excitement and enthusiasm. But as we then were thinking about next steps, what beyond just providing this information, what can we do next? And that is when we decided, you know, we need to ask the people who are doing this work, who want to do this work at their seminaries. And so we came up with this concept of doing a very thorough, exhaustive survey. We thought about doing it in a number of different ways and talked to some polling experts who said, you know, for this kind of a thing, you really do need to do personal interviews. And so I conducted 23, 25 2-hour personal interviews with people all over theological education, a lot of scholars, a lot of academics, but also I talked to students and I talked to administrative people. What did they want? What resources did they need? What did they need to do the greening work that they wanted to do? And then subsequently, we followed up with some other interviews. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what came out of that survey, because there were some themes.
Certainly, and as a sociologist, we made sure that that was a random sample, that we just weren't going to the schools we already knew were doing something. Right. We really wanted to hear, what did people need? How were the people who were working on it? What did they need to support their work? What would catch the attention of administrators? How could you get it to go beyond being person specific, which is what we realized had been true of the generation before us. The institution didn't own it. They counted on a faculty member.
These green sheep, if you will.
Right. And those folks get tired of being lone sheep.
Yeah.
So that was some of what the important listening we did was to sort of ask people in these different institutions, locations, what they needed, what they wanted. And what they really wanted was someone to sort of say, if you want to green your grounds, these are the things to pay attention to. Here's some information to help you. But you can't just green your grounds. You've got to pay attention to your worship life, your communal life, how you eat together. All too often in theological education, we get focused on what happens in the classroom. And where that's really important and spreading it throughout the curriculum, we were really paying attention to what do our graduates need when they get out? How are we equipping them? How do we help institutions walk their talk so that we preach and do what we teach?
This notion of equipping the young leaders of tomorrow is at the essence of what we do. And as Laurel said, the first thing everyone said to me was money. We want more money. They also said that to the extent that ATS was paying attention would be very helpful to them. But thirdly, the thing that we heard was, we want to do this. We don't know where to start. We don't know what's most important. We have limited resources. Tell us what to do. And so it was out of that our new green certification, which has been going so very well, came into being. It provides a plan of attack. It gives very specific guidelines across buildings and grounds and worship and of course academics. That's what they were yearning for. They wanted a plan of attack, a systematic way of looking for someone to tell them what at least some experts thought that were the most important things for them to do. And so that's what they told us, and that's what we ultimately were able to deliver in the certification.
And so, you know, the money piece still is out there. ATS is the Association of Theological Schools, and it's certainly more on their radar, but we're still always in conversation trying to catch their attention. There are many, many schools doing exciting things now, and I think that's one of the exciting things is over 50 schools identify themselves with the Green Seminary Initiative. They aren't all in certification, but what they saw it as and what we had hoped is that it would be an important thing for a school to belong to be a part of. And that's what we saw happen. That when we would, you know, sort of profile a school or put something up about them, you know, a faculty member could go to administration and say, look, we are being recognized nationally. And so that has been another part of this sort of strategy is one, to help people know who else is doing what. So they can network, so they can get ideas, so they can support each other, but also so they can turn that into getting the attention sometimes of administrators that have so many things on their desks, getting the attention of alums, sort of getting their name out, so that I think that helped more rapidly spread the sort of excitement and energy about it was people say, oh, so-and-so is doing it. Or like, you know, even within Methodist circles or Lutheran circles, you know.
And they wanted to talk to each other about it. And that brings us to the sort of the last piece of this. And that is these, they wanted an opportunity to learn from each other, particularly regionally and intra-denominationally. And so we began these, in response to that, these regional conferences around the country that have been so very important, not only so that schools that are doing things can talk to each other, but schools who are wanting to do some more work can be exposed to different models that are already happening in their region. The resources are so slim, as we know, at seminaries and theological schools right now. We need to not reinvent the wheel, and we need to learn from each other and be very efficient with our resources. And so these regional gatherings give us an opportunity not only to share information, but potentially to share resources. I know in the Washington area, we have our Washington Theological Consortium, which has a new ECHO certification. And so we meet, we met recently to say, okay, I'm going to teach this class, you're going to teach this one at Lutheran, I'm going to teach this one down at Proctor, and gathering together, marshaling our resources together, and putting together a plan for greening theological education in the Washington area, which has been, we're doing much more as a community than we could possibly do as individual seminaries.
And each year we take advantage of the huge American Academy of Religion Society of Biblical Literature gatherings and have a breakfast. And what's really wonderful is the people who walk in who either have been working by themselves and they're so thrilled to find other folks. They're curious. And so I think that's been an important place also, that each year at AARSBL, there's a place for people to come, to meet other people, to hear what's going on. And we've really, some really important people over the 10 plus years now have showed up at those meetings, and we've gotten to know them. And so we hope that if you're at AARSBL in a year, look for the Green Seminary Initiative and come.
Right, and check out our growing resources on our website too. There's an awful lot going on, and there's work on our Facebook page as well. So